Good afternoon and welcome to Berry College in Rome, Georgia. My name is Ina Salvaleon and I'm a junior visual communication major here. We are so excited to have Associate Professor of Biology Renee Carleton with us today to answer your Eagle questions. Dr. Carleton serves as a scientific advisor for our Bald Eagle Nest Cam project and is our resident expert on anything bird. She earned a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from the University of Florida and a doctorate in Wildlife Ecology and Management from the University of Georgia. Her research focuses on wildlife diseases, especially those affecting birds. Dr. Carleton and her students have studied the eastern bluebirds on campus for more than 12 years, and through their efforts have helped the population increase from only 6 nesting pairs to over 60. When not teaching or conducting research, she is an avid birder and has seen over 300 species. So, for our first question, it comes from Peg Kimmel. Are the female's eyes gold and male's eyes blue? It's hard to tell them apart when they're not in the nest together.
Thanks for the question, Peg. You'll have to look really closely, but their eyes are the same color, both the male and the female. It's kind of a silvery color. If you look at some of the photographs taken by the wildlife photographers that visit campus frequently, you'll see that the eye color is the same. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Next question is from Laura Pasquale. How big are the eaglets at this point in time?
Laura, to me they look like they're about the size of a pigeon, which would be anywhere between, say, 2 and 4 pounds. Of course, B4 is a bit bigger than B5, but certainly they've grown a lot, and we expect to see them grow quite a bit more in the coming weeks. Great question.
Andrea Carroll in Sacramento, California says her second grade students enjoy watching the eagle family every day. They're very excited that both eggs have hatched. They would like to know if eagles drink water, and if not, what do they drink?
Andrea, I'm so happy that your class is watching. It's really exciting when we can bring the eagles to the classroom. And that's another great question. Yes, eagles do drink water when they're flying around and catching prey. Now the eaglets are not drinking water. All of the moisture that they need comes from the food items that the parents are bringing them to eat.
The Everidge family in Cypress, Texas asks, where is the male eagle at nighttime while the mother eagle is on top of the baby sleeping?
Hi Texas there, nice family question for you all. And the male spends a lot of his time at night in another tree that's adjacent to the nest tree. So he's nearby, he's just not in the nest.
Helen and Jacob Reed ask, Jacob is 8 years old and has been watching the eagles for 2 years now. How long do eagles live, and will the baby eagles live in the same area when they're older?
Okay, hi Jacob. Eagles live in the wild to be about 28 years old, which is actually 10,220 days. And the babies may stay in this area. We don't know for sure because, of course, we haven't banded them or radio tagged them. But it's possible because of the food resources that we have here in Northwest Georgia that the eaglets that fledge this year will stay around. We'll just have to wait and see.
Caroline Root asks a couple questions. First is, how long does it take for an eagle to be fully able to lay eggs?
Okay, an eagle has to be about 4 to 5 years old before it can actually start laying eggs.
And her next question is also, is there a way to determine what the sex of the eagle is when it's in the egg?
When it's in the egg, there's not really a good way to do that. The only way would be to actually take a sample out of the egg and test for the DNA pattern, the chromosomes, and of course we wouldn't want to do that. So right now we can't tell from just looking at the egg. We have to wait until the birds are actually large enough for us to determine their gender.
Birdie wants to know what the story of the discovery of the Berry College eagle nest is.
Well, Birdie, that's a story that I know you know well, but I'll go ahead and repeat it for everybody else. About this time in 2012, a student came to me and said, did you know there's an eagle nest on campus? And of course, being a bird watcher, I was really excited to hear that, and I asked him, well, where around the reservoir is it? For those of you who don't know, we have a reservoir up on the mountain campus, and I assume because eagles like to nest around water that they would be nesting up there. When he told me that the nest tree was located behind the Cage Athletic Center, I was pretty surprised. So I went and checked it out, and sure enough, I found a very large nest. So I had another one of my students start monitoring the nest for eagle activity, and sure enough, within a couple of days, he saw eagles bringing sticks to the nest. So we contacted the Department of Natural Resources. They came and looked at the nest, and at first thought maybe it was a red-tailed hawk nest. And I kind of agreed with that because, again, this was a really unusual location for an eagle nest. But we continued to monitor the nest and saw more activity, which confirmed that the eagles were indeed nesting in this site. The rest is history.
All right. First grade students at Hembry Springs Elementary School in Roswell, Georgia have come up with a list of questions.
Okay.
The first one is, how did you all get close enough to the nest to put up the cameras?
Well, Georgia Power brought in one of their really, really tall lift trucks, and they took the camera up in the lift truck and mounted it to the tree. So that's how we actually got the camera up in the nest.
Do the eaglets have sharp claws yet? If not, when do they grow them?
Well, their claws are there as soon as they're hatched, and of course, just like our fingernails, they continue to grow in length and they'll get sharper. So right now, if you were to pick one of them up, you would feel that the nails, the talons, are quite sharp at this point, but they'll of course continue to grow.
How high can they fly, and when will they start to fly?
All right, the eaglets will probably start flying around, we think, April, mid-April, maybe early May. So that's still another month and a half, 2 months away. So we'll see exactly when they decide to take their first flight. But eagles can fly quite high. Some of them have been recorded almost a mile up. So that's a long way to fly. They like to soar very high sometimes. Good questions.
June Mahala in Lakeville, Massachusetts asks, are you looking into the hydrilla toxin and coots issue?
That's a great question, and that problem has been found in Georgia. We're lucky enough that we don't seem to have the hydrilla plant here that's been associated with the toxin. Now, we're thinking about looking at certain bodies of water to see if there's any sign of that plant being here, but so far, no problems.
Anna and Victoria Harris are huge fans of the Berry Eagles, and Victoria would like to know how long the adult eagles must continue to sit on the eaglets for warmth and protection.
Well, Victoria, you probably noticed that the eaglets still have their downy feathers right now, and that really helps protect them from the cold weather that we've been having. One of the parents will continue to stay with them, especially in weather like we're having right now, which is kind of rainy and cold, and we maybe expect some kind of icing conditions tomorrow. So they'll continue to protect them from the elements, from the weather, for a while longer, but you'll start to notice that the parents spend less time in the nest as the eaglets get bigger.
Our next question is from Lauren Whitaker in Roswell, Georgia. I have seen what looks to be squirrel carcasses in the nest. Is this their main diet? I thought that fish were the predominant diet for eagles.
Well, you're right, Lauren. Fish are the main diet for eagles, and also certain species of waterfowl. But eagles are very opportunistic. They're not small mammal hunters like we would associate hawks and owls. But if they find an opportunity for an easy meal, which would be a roadkill squirrel, then certainly they'll pick it up. So the squirrels that you've been seeing in the nest have not been caught by the eagles. They found them on the side of the road.
Carol Porter asks, where do the eagles go when they leave Berry in late spring?
Well, there's a number of bodies of water near Rome where we are at Berry College. There's a large lake in Alabama called Lake Guntersville. A very large number of eagles will go there. And then also Lake Weiss is in Alabama, not too far away. So eagles are seen quite frequently there, as well as a couple of lakes to our north and to our east. We believe they're around in the area. They just don't come back to the nest very often, but certainly we do see them all summer long. So they're around.
Jan Schultz says, when Mama and Papa are in the nest together, they frequently share glances, and then one of them does something. I know birds in general communicate through vocalizations, but are Mama and Papa Eagle also communicating non-verbally or communicating with one another in a different way that humans cannot hear?
Well, certainly birds do a lot of body language types of communication. And when they are looking at each other, they're doing some subtle cues that help reinforce their pair bond. And so, yes, most definitely they are communicating with each other in other ways than vocalizations. That's a good question.
Susan Scheller in Johns Creek, Georgia asks, all the animals that are brought to the nest are no longer living. How do the eagles usually kill their various prey?
Well, if you could see the length of a talon on an eagle, you could understand how when an eagle catches a prey item, that death is usually pretty instantaneous. So they're very good at catching their prey and making sure that it's incapacitated very quickly. So yeah, they're excellent about that.
From OtterFan42, if something happens to a mate, will the survivor bring a new mate to the old nest?
That has been known to occur in eagles when one member of a pair has passed on, that the eagle remaining will find a new mate and very often bring that mate to a nest. It's usually if the male survives that he'll find a new female mate and bring her to the nest. Females may then, if they're the surviving member of the pair, they will typically find another male who has an established territory.
From Michelle Rusin, do the eagles know when an egg is ready to hatch?
Well, actually what happens is as the eaglet is starting to pip, which means breaking through that eggshell, they are vocalizing. And so the parents can hear them making their little chirping noises, their vocalizations. So they are aware that hatching is imminent.
From Janet Scanlon, do they do most of their feasting outside the nest, leaving the food inside the nest mostly for the babies?
Well, you'll notice that a lot of times there's plenty of food in the nest. This morning there were 2 fish and there was a coot. Some of the food is consumed in the nest and then some of it is outside of the nest. The male will usually catch fish or a waterfowl at one of the lakes where he spends a lot of time hunting, and sometimes he'll consume part of the prey there before he brings it back to the nest. So I would say you're correct on both of those, that yes, some food is eaten in the nest and some is eaten outside of the nest.
Lori Lane asks, when an eagle snags prey, whether it's coot or fish, when does the prey die?
It happens pretty quickly. The eagle's foot has a lot of power, and again, that talon is very long, so they are able to dispatch their prey items pretty much instantaneously.
From Scotty Price, will these eagles return to the same nest next year?
Scotty, they seem to be pretty faithful about returning to the nest every year. Most eagles do use the same nest year after year after year. And in fact, the longest use of a nest on record is over 20 years. So we are hoping that our eagles stay around for a long time.
Diane McCoy asks, how far can the babies see at this stage?
How far can they see? Well, I think they can see actually pretty well. Probably they're getting to the point where they can see their parents flying in with food. And so their vision will continue to improve as they get older, of course. So right now, even so, they have good vision.
Scott Lewis wants to know, what time of day does the male or eagle arrive?
The male usually comes in sometime around daybreak. Usually right now that's about 7:30, 7 o'clock. And they typically do a shift change after that where he may take over some of the duties carrying in the nest and give the female a break. But pretty generally we see him come in shortly after sunrise.
From Debbie Milstead, why do the eagle parents not defend the weaker babies? Does she know it's weak?
Well, this is very typical behavior for birds of prey, where the eaglet that hatched first, or the young hawk or owlet that hatched first, is the more dominant one, just because it's bigger. And the eagles really don't have the ability to tell the difference at this stage. Their brains, even though they're developed for some pretty sophisticated things, don't really have the ability to detect that weakness. And the only reason they seem to show favoritism to B4 is because B4, being a little bit bigger, is the stronger of the chicks asking for food. They're triggering on that asking for food response that you're seeing when the eaglets raise up their head. The female does seem to be a bit better at feeding B5 than the dad is, but I watched very carefully this morning and both eaglets received pretty good meals. So I think things are really pretty secure in that B5 is getting enough food and we don't have to worry about B5 possibly starving.
The mom eagle seems to be favoring her leg and foot some in this really cold weather. Does the cold temperature bother her joints like it does us?
Well, I think everybody knows that she sustained an injury to one of her legs last year, and she seems to manage just fine with that injury. She can catch prey. We've seen her carry sticks into the nest and also carry grass and straw and prey items with that injured leg. But I did see her kind of limp around and stumble a bit when it was really cold. So I know sometimes my bones ache, and I'm sure that she's having some discomfort because of that injury, but you know, she's adapted very well, and spring is not that far away, so she'll be fine.
From Carol Winthrop in Pace, Florida, how often statistically does one of two eaglets not make it?
Okay, that's another great question. And yes, there are many times when a young eagle does not survive to fledge or leave the nest. Here in Georgia, the statistics show that for every nest, about 1.5 eaglets fledge. Some nests have 3 eaglets, some have 2, and then like last year we had 1. So if you take all of those into consideration and the number that successfully fledge, it turns out to be about 1.5.
Becky Clough asks, how big are the adult berry eagles? What is their weight and wingspan?
Okay, eagles in general weigh between, say, 14 and 15 pounds, which is typically the size of your average Thanksgiving turkey. The wingspan, though, is quite large. It can be anywhere between about 5 to 6 feet. I'm 5'7", and so their wingspan would be, you know, a few more inches above my head, so that's really pretty big wingspan.
Nate Kozel from Glenwood Primary School in Rome, Georgia wants to know, how fast can an eagle fly?
Well, eagles can fly about 35 miles an hour when they really want to fly fast, but most of the time they're soaring, and so they're cruising somewhere around 5 to 10.
From Eva Elsengak, is it known how old the female eagle is?
Eva, we're not 100% sure. We think that she's probably somewhere around 8 to 10 years of age, and we're basing that on understanding that eagles don't reproduce until they're 4 or 5 years old, and that we've had them here with us for 3 years now, so that's possibly 8 years old. She does have a little bit of brown coloration on one area of her tail, which may suggest that she's a younger female rather than an older female. So we're going to go with between 8 and 10 years of age.
Well, we just received an email from Miss Paris and Mrs. Conkel's kindergarten class, and they gave us a list of questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, how tall do eagles get?
How tall do eagles get? About that tall.
How much do they weigh when they're born?
How much do they weigh when they're born? Well, they don't quite weigh a pound. So if you took a bag of beans, which weighs about a pound, our eaglets would be about half to 3/4 of that. So the next time you go to the grocery store with one of your parents, pick up a bag of beans and hold that in your hands, and then think about how much half of that would weigh, and that's how much a little eaglet would weigh.
What about when they're full grown?
When they're full grown, about 14 to 15 pounds.
Are male eagles bigger than female eagles?
The male is smaller than the female. In birds of prey, the females are always larger than the males.
How long can they stay in the air when they're flying?
Oh, well, they can stay up for very, very long periods of time. Because of that wingspan that they have, it's built for soaring, which means they just spread their wings and let the air currents carry them. So they can stay up for 2 or 3 hours if they want to.
Do they eat 3 meals a day like me?
Do they eat 3 meals a day? Well, that kind of depends on what they feel like. When they're feeding the babies, that requires more work for them in order to catch that food, so they're going to need to eat more frequently. But I don't think they set the same schedule that we do. I know they eat in the morning and they eat later in the afternoon, but the babies eat about every 3 to 4 hours now.
When their wings are open, how long are they?
They're going to be about 6 feet wide from tip to tip.
How many eggs can they lay in their lifetime?
In their lifetime, boy, I'll have to do some math to figure that out. Let's see. They can lay anywhere between 1 and 3 eggs a year. And if they lived about, let's say, 30 years, just to make it easy, that's right around 90 eggs if they laid as many as they possibly could. So let's give that a little bit of an estimate and reduce it just a bit and say probably about 70 eggs.
Why are babies gray?
Well, babies are gray because when the down feathers come out, they're nice and fluffy, and gray just seems to be the perfect color for that. So that's why they're gray.
And how long do they stay gray?
Well, you'll start noticing pretty soon that we're starting to have some brown feathers come in on especially B4. And what happens is because the fluffy down feathers are used to keep them warm, the brown feathers, the body feathers, and the flight feathers are used for flying later on. So they have to go from being fuzzy brown fluffy, fuzzy gray fluffy babies to brown feathered young eagles. And so they'll start losing their down feathers and start growing in those brown feathers pretty soon.
All right. Those are all the questions from the kindergarten class.
Okay.
Moving on to Sharon Kite in Charlotte, North Carolina. She asks, do the attacks of the dominant eaglet usually continue as the eaglets age?
Well, we're going to have to wait and see on that. Probably you'll still see some dominant behavior from B4 on B5. Now this morning when I was watching, I noticed that B4 was fed first, and that goes along with being the more dominant eaglet, and B5 just kind of sat in the back and waited. But once B4 was full, B5 was able to move forward and then receive food from the mother eagle. So I think the dominance has been working its way through a natural progression where B4 will be the dominant eagle, but we won't see the same kind of attacks that we saw earlier on.
From Spec 4 M79, is last year's eagle B3 still in the area?
We really don't know where B3 is. Some eagles, when they fledge and they become independent of their parents, they will go on very, very long journeys. In Florida, some of those eagles that left their parental nest site would fly as far as New York State. So it's possible that B3 is still in the area, but it's also very possible that she's gone on a journey and eventually she either may make her way back here or she may decide to stay somewhere else. Unfortunately, we won't know for sure, but wherever she is, we're sure that she's happy.
Linda B. asks, should something happen to either eagle parent, would the eaglets be supported enough by one to fledge successfully?
I believe this pair have the skills and the food resources that if one did have an unfortunate incident and didn't survive, the other parent could continue to raise the eaglets just fine.
Our next question is from L. Hennessy in Texas. What can be done to protect the eagle, and other birds for that matter, from the hazards of wind farms?
Okay, wind farms. That's an interesting question because wind farms, on the good side, are a source of clean energy. Doesn't create any pollutants, doesn't create any carbon dioxide emissions. So wind farms do have their good side. Unfortunately, there have been a large number of bird deaths associated with wind farms because birds can't see the spinning rotors and the blades that are associated with those wind farm towers. And so some of them have been killed. There's been some studies done that suggest that if you put some type of a flashing light on the ends of the blades, that may make them more visible for the birds. And I would certainly encourage for conservationists and Department of Energy personnel to look into more ways to help prevent eagle deaths, especially, and all other birds that may die because of wind farms. Certainly we have to have clean energy, and wind farms do seem to be valuable in that respect, but we have to remember that sometimes there are consequences that we really don't intend to happen, and they can be serious.
Darlene asks, when can you tell the sex of the eaglets?
Well, Darlene, we can't really tell for sure. Last year, when B3 grew so quickly and became about the size of her dad before she was not even finished growing, we then assumed that B3 was indeed a girl. It's going to be a little bit more difficult with this pair of eaglets because we don't know yet how quickly they're going to grow, and we only have the size of them compared to their dad and mom to tell. We're not going to do any blood testing to actually determine their gender because that would be too invasive. So we'll just kind of watch and see, and if it's looking like one of them is significantly bigger than dad at a certain point, then we might say, yeah, we think this is a girl.
From B. Ham, when will they start learning to fly, and will the eagles continue to use the same nest each year?
Okay, again, I think our pair will continue to use this nest for many years to come. We certainly think so, and we certainly hope so because we enjoy watching them so much. The young eaglets should start to fly when they're a little older, probably another month or two before we start seeing them branch, and then eventually they'll take that big first step.
Okay. Our next question is from Patty Redmond. What happens to all the leftover carcasses after they eat?
Well, you've probably noticed that they're just about eating everything that's brought in. Eagles are very good about making sure that they consume every bit. And so there's not a lot left over. Anything that is left behind, though, the dad is really good about cleaning up the nest by burying it deep into the nesting material, so it's not really hanging around.
All right. From Autumn's Nest in Fairburn, Georgia, how long do eagles live?
Eagles live somewhere between, say, 26 and 28 years in the wild. Eagles that are in captivity can live a bit longer, say 30 to 32 years.
Our next question comes from Kyoto, Japan, from Terry Sugai. Would last year's experience of raising just one chick have influenced the father in the need to prioritize one chick over another?
Now, the behavior that you're seeing is kind of typical behavior that we call the Cain and Abel syndrome, where the older nestling tends to be the more dominant one. I don't think the male has gained any experience in knowing which is the more dominant. He's just reacting to the eaglet that's asking for food more strongly than the other one. So I'm not sure exactly how experiential learning occurs in eagles, but I think it's more reactive to a behavior that's being expressed by the eaglets.
All right. I think that's all the time we have for all the
Okay.
questions. Thank you for all the questions, and sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but keep watching the Berry College Eagles.
And a special hello to Eli, who's still fighting that brain tumor. Hang in there, Eli. We're pulling for you.